My name is Claire. I am 32 years old, and I never thought betrayal would arrive in a single line of text. But that night, my phone buzzed, and there it was on the family group chat. We think it's best you step away for now. No explanation, no private conversation. Just a cold message from my parents delivered like a verdict. And then the part that hurt more than I expected, one by one, the little icons lit up. My aunt pressed a thumbs up. My uncle sent a check mark. Cousins dropped brief words of agreement. Within minutes, I was voted out of my own bloodline as if I were a liability on a balance sheet. For a long moment, I stared at the glowing screen in the dark of my apartment. I had spent my whole life proving myself in this family, clawing for recognition in a world that was supposed to already be mine. And now, with one sentence, they dismissed me as if I were nothing. The silence of my room pressed heavy on my chest. I could hear my own breathing fast and uneven. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, something colder took root. A clarity I had never felt before. That message was not just rejection. It was confirmation. Confirmation that no matter how much I had built, how many millions I had earned for them, they had never seen me. They never would. They didn't just undervalue me. They erased me. I typed a simple reply, fingers steady, though my heart was racing. Understood. I'll respect that decision. I will also step away from the family fund. My hands trembled when I hit send, not from fear, from release. From the knowledge that I was about to alter the ground beneath them in a way they could not yet imagine. I put my phone face down on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights of Boston blinked like 1,000 tiny truths. For years, I had swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every patronizing pat on the shoulder. I had let them believe I would always play by their rules, but tonight, their rules no longer applied. When I finally picked my phone back up, the chat was buzzing with more affirmations of my removal. Not a single voice spoke up for me. Not one cousin, not even my mother broke the silence of compliance. I was out, entirely. And yet in that very moment, something shifted deep inside me. I realized I was no longer waiting for their approval, no longer desperate for their recognition. I was free to act on my own terms. The irony struck me hard. They thought they were shutting a door in my face. What they didn't know was that I had already been building another door, one they couldn't touch, one they couldn't control. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I felt a strange calm. The kind of calm that comes not when you're safe, but when you finally accept that safety will never be handed to you. You have to claim it. The story I'm about to share is not just about numbers and finance. It's about betrayal and power, about a woman who was pushed aside until she chose to step into her own strength. And maybe as you listen, you'll ask yourself, what would you do if the very people meant to stand by you decided you weren't worth keeping? Would you beg to return, or would you finally decide to walk away on your own terms? Mom, when that group message landed like a knife to the chest, I had a choice. I could beg for an explanation. I could plead for my place at the table. Or I could take their words literally. They said they wanted me to step away, and so I did. Not only from the family business, not only from the suffocating dynamic that had followed me since childhood, but from the single thread that held them all together, the family fund. I opened my laptop, logged into the account, and hovered my cursor over the option that would sever my contribution. $4,200,000. That was my share. Years of patient investments compounded into a balance that quietly represented over 1/3 of the entire fund. My heart pounded, not from doubt, but from the weight of the decision. I clicked, confirm. Within moments, my portion was gone, extracted, untouchable, and with it the balance of power shifted in ways they couldn't yet imagine. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, realizing how clean the break was. No shouting match, no slammed doors, just numbers moving silently across digital ledgers. Yet that single transaction carried the power of 1,000 words they would never say. Respect, recognition, equality, all of which they had denied me. What they didn't know was that by excluding me, they had freed me. I wasn't chained to them anymore. I wasn't waiting for validation that would never come. I was finally answering to myself. Still, the weight of years pressed down. 8 years of being undermined in meetings. 8 years of listening to cousins recycle my strategies and be praised for them. 8 years of hearing my father tell me that my fancy degree didn't mean I understood the real world. And tonight, all of that ended with a single transfer. I closed my laptop and turned off my phone. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for their reactions. I didn't need to see the explosion coming. I already knew it was inevitable. They would wake to discover their empire had a crack, and I had placed it there deliberately and legally. As I moved through the quiet of my brownstone, I thought about the irony. They dismissed me because they believed I was dispensable. What they never realized was that I was the foundation. I was the one quietly keeping the fund alive, growing it, balancing it. Without me, they would soon learn how fragile their so-called legacy really was. And in that thought, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time, the fear of being excluded was replaced by the relief of no longer needing to belong. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something. Before I share what happened when the storm finally broke, I want to know, have you ever been cast aside by people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever been told in words or actions that you weren't enough? If you have, share your story below. Tell me where you're watching from. Let me know I'm not alone in this. And if these stories of families learning hard lessons matter to you, hit subscribe. It's the only way we keep building a community where voices like ours aren't silenced anymore. Because what happened next was louder than anything I could have imagined. When I woke the next morning, my phone was buzzing on the nightstand like a trapped wasp. Notification after notification poured in, but I ignored them, pouring myself coffee instead. By the time I sat down, there were over 80 missed calls and dozens of frantic messages. My father's voice filled the first voicemail, sharp with panic. "Heather, what happened?" "The bank flagged everything. The fund is locked down." I didn't rush to respond. I didn't apologize. I simply sent one text: "I'm honoring your decision. You asked me to step away, and I have." For once, I wasn't the daughter begging to be seen. I was the woman who finally understood her worth and acted on it. And that was only the beginning. Hi. The Millers. That name wasn't just a family surname. It was a brand etched into the marble of downtown buildings, whispered in financial circles across New England. People didn't just know us, they respected us. Or at least that's what I had been raised to believe. Our story began with my grandfather, a man who clawed his way out of the ashes of the post-war economy. He built Miller Financial from nothing but grit and timing. By the time he passed the company to my father, the firm was already a symbol of generational wealth. My father expanded it with the confidence of a man who never heard the word no. My mother perfected the role of corporate hostess. She baked her famous pies for politicians and CEOs, turning dessert into currency for million-dollar deals. We lived in a sprawling colonial house filled with imported furniture chandeliers that glittered like frozen rain, and art bought from galleries I was too young to appreciate. Every wall whispered we made it. Every dinner party reinforced the narrative we were untouchable. But behind those glossy pictures with governors and senators, behind those meticulously staged parties, was a truth no one outside our circle ever saw. To the Millers' image was everything. Loyalty was expected. But value, the real kind, the measurable kind, was negotiable and often ignored. Even as a child, I could see it. While my cousins played in the yard, I combed through stock reports my father left on the coffee table. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Numbers just made sense to me in a way people never did. By 10, I was asking questions my father dodged. By 12, I had a clearer sense of market shifts than most junior analysts. Yet instead of being celebrated, my curiosity was treated as an inconvenience. A little girl who needed to be told her place. That pattern never changed. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I proved, I remained the daughter. A guest in a business I was born into. My father's nods of approval always seemed half-hearted, my uncle's interruptions constant, my aunt's dismissive smiles infuriating. And the cruelest part, they all acted like this was normal, like it was the natural order of things. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. My Uncle William raised his glass and toasted. To the Miller family business where everyone pulls their weight and shares the rewards equally, laughter and cheers followed. I sipped my wine quietly, hiding the bitter truth. That very quarter-mile division alone had generated 62% of profits. And still, it was our achievement, never mine. I clinked my glass against Amanda's, my cousin, who sat across from me. She rolled her eyes, a silent confirmation that she saw the injustice too. That moment branded itself in my memory. The entire family toasting equality while benefiting from my silence. It was then I began sketching my escape plan in my mind. Not revenge, survival. Because deep down, I knew I couldn't keep feeding a machine that only consumed me. It's strange how an empire can look so solid from the outside but feel so hollow inside. People saw wealth. I saw rot. They saw unity. I saw fractures. And while they obsessed over maintaining the facade, I learned the art of patience. Strategic patience. Because if they weren't going to value me, I would have to build something that did. And here's where I want to pause and turn the question to you. Have you ever been in a family, or even a workplace, where your contributions were invisible, where your worth was measured by tradition instead of truth? If you have, drop a comment below. Tell me what it felt like to know your efforts kept things afloat, but your name never made it onto the credit. I know I can't be the only one who's felt that gnawing contradiction, being essential, yet expendable in the eyes of those closest to you, because that's what it meant to be a Miller. On the outside, untouchable. On the inside, suffocating. And little did they know the very skills they dismissed were the ones I would use to upend everything they thought was secure. My name may have been stamped onto the family letterhead, but inside those walls, I was never treated as an equal. From the moment I graduated top of my class at Wharton double major in finance and economics, I thought finally they would have to see me. Finally, my father, my uncles, even my smug cousins would have no choice but to recognize that I wasn't just another Miller kid coasting on the name. I had worked, sacrificed, proven myself in ways most of them never would. But reality inside Miller Financial was different. The day I joined the firm, my father placed me not in a leadership role, not even as an independent associate, but directly under the supervision of my cousin Jake. Jake, who had scraped through a state college with barely passing grades. Jake, who had been there all of 7 months longer than me. I can still hear my father's voice, condescending and absolute. You need to understand how we do things in the real world. Jake has been here longer. As if 7 months outweighed years of education, strategy, and discipline. At first I tried to swallow my pride. I told myself that real results would speak louder than favoritism. So I worked. I built portfolios that consistently outperformed the market by 7 to 9%, while the industry celebrated too. I designed risk models that predicted downturns before anyone else on the floor even noticed the first signs. Clients began requesting me by name, something unheard of for someone at my level. And yet, when those same clients sent glowing reviews, my father casually accepted the credit in board meetings. What stung most wasn't the theft of recognition, it was the refusal to see me. Every time I sat at that mahogany conference table and presented charts that showed our growth, I could feel their eyes glaze over. I was too technical, too ambitious, too much. My uncles would chuckle, asking, "But what does your father think?" as if my numbers weren't real until Robert Miller gave them his seal of approval. My Aunt Patricia perfected the art of stealing my ideas, presenting them weeks later as her own, with just enough change in wording to claim originality. The others would nod impressed, while I sat silent, rage bubbling behind my calm smile. You see, in my family, talent wasn't a currency. Obedience was. And obedience meant shrinking myself to fit their mold. My mother would whisper after meetings, "Honey, men don't like women who sound too smart. Let your father and uncles feel important." I was 30 years old managing over $300 million in client assets and still being told to play dumb for approval. I kept going, though. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually results would break through the wall of bias. But the wall never cracked. Instead, the better I became, the tighter they reinforced it. Jake could walk in late with nothing but a coffee cup and still be praised for client relationships. Meanwhile, I spent nights and weekends crunching data, refining algorithms, building a foundation they all stood on without ever admitting it. I remember one meeting vividly. I had just finished explaining a new strategy that had returned 14% for the Westfield portfolio in one quarter. For a moment, silence fell across the room as if they couldn't deny the truth of my success. But then my father's voice cut through. Heather, theory is one thing. We deal in practical realities. I wanted to scream. It wasn't theory, it was reality. It was numbers that had already saved an underperforming account. Yet he erased it with one sentence. That was the dynamic over and over. They could never admit I was right, because admitting it meant shattering the hierarchy that kept them comfortable. And so no matter how brilliant the strategy, no matter how undeniable the result, I remained the daughter, the afterthought, the detail that needed managing, rather than the leader they couldn't afford to lose. But I kept notes. I built files. I logged my models' registered patents in my own name and quietly set aside every dollar I earned outside of their control. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. I knew that patience, when sharpened, becomes its own kind of power. And one day, when the facade of their superiority finally cracked, I would be ready to show them just how much of their empire rested on the daughter they never valued. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I just kept delivering results that no one else could match, eventually the walls of bias would crumble. But inside, Miller financial effort was invisible unless it came from the right person, with the right last name, or more accurately, the right gender. For 8 long years, I poured everything I had into the firm. My strategies consistently outperformed the market. Quarter after quarter, the numbers didn't lie. Clients didn't just trust me, they requested me. They asked for me by name in meetings, sent follow-up emails to me, not to the partners. My division alone was responsible for 62% of the company's profits in a single quarter. 62%. That should have made me indispensable. Instead, it made me a threat. When the time came to celebrate achievements, I was always quietly erased. My father would stand in front of the board, presenting our results, smiling proudly, as if his steady hand had guided the firm to victory. No mention of the late nights I spent designing risk models that saved millions. No acknowledgement of the algorithms I'd built that doubled client returns. Just the vague phrase, "We at Miller Financial know how to deliver." The hypocrisy was suffocating. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner, my Uncle William raising his glass, saying, "To the Miller family business, where everyone pulls their weight and shares the rewards equally." Everyone cheered, clinking glasses, praising themselves. I forced a smile, raising my glass as well, though my chest burned. I knew the truth, that without me the numbers would collapse. But there I was, playing the quiet role, watching others take the spotlight, while my work remained the invisible scaffolding holding the whole empire up. It was Amanda, my cousin, who once whispered across the table, "They do the same thing to me. Worse, actually. I don't have your skills to make them money. They just want me to marry someone useful." Her words were a bitter comfort. Proof that I wasn't imagining the injustice that the Miller system thrived on diminishing women while pretending to be progressive. Every time my Aunt Patricia stole one of my ideas, remember when Heather suggested international markets? I've been thinking Europe could be a great expansion. I would bite my tongue so hard it almost bled. They nodded, praised her brilliance, and ignored the fact that 3 weeks earlier, I'd presented a detailed plan. They wanted my brain, but they didn't want me. And yet I stayed. Why? Because I believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. Because I thought that maybe if I just endured a little longer, they would finally acknowledge me. But deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't blind. They chose not to see me. Because admitting my worth meant redistributing power, and power was the one currency they refused to share. Still, I kept showing up, kept dressing modestly, kept my head down. I let them believe I was just grateful to be included, but every time they erased me, every time Jake strutted into a meeting with nothing but a coffee cup and still walked away with praise, I filed it away like a receipt. Proof of a debt they would one day owe me. And maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've worked in a place or lived in a family where your effort was invisible, your contributions dismissed until someone else repeated your words, and suddenly it was brilliant. If you've ever been in that place, tell me in the comments. Share your story. And if you want more voices refusing to stay silent, make sure you subscribe. Because stories like mine aren't rare, they're just rarely told out loud. That's the thing about erasure. It only works as long as you allow it. And while they thought I was quietly obedient, I was actually preparing. I registered patents in my own name. I built personal portfolios separate from theirs. I created safety nets they knew nothing about. Because one day I knew the toast of equal rewards would finally choke on the truth that the real weight of Miller Financial had always rested on the daughter they dismissed. And when that day came, I wouldn't be raising a glass. I would be raising the stakes. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't strike like lightning. It doesn't roar like thunder. It seeps in slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize it has shaped the very way you see yourself. That was the pain of being a Miller daughter in a business where my bloodline should have been my advantage, but instead was the very reason I was dismissed. I lived with that ache for years. It wasn't one explosive betrayal, but thousands of tiny cuts. Every time an uncle interrupted me mid-sentence with, "That's too complicated. Heather, let's keep things simple." Every time my aunt smiled sweetly while twisting my ideas into her own, presented weeks later as though she dreamed them up herself. Every time my father patted my shoulder with that condescending look and said, "Sweetheart, you're still learning how the real world works." I wasn't learning, I was leading. I was carrying portfolios worth hundreds of millions. I was developing strategies that industry journals would one day praise as innovative. And yet, inside the walls of Miller Financial, I was just the daughter who thinks she's smart. The most painful part wasn't their words. It was the silence. Silence when clients requested me by name, but the family shifted the credit elsewhere. Silence when numbers proved my strategies worked, but no one said my name in the boardroom. Silence when I pushed back against lazy decisions and was met with nothing more than a dismissive wave of a hand. That silence taught me a dangerous lesson to question my own worth. There were nights I sat in my apartment staring at spreadsheets, wondering if maybe I really was too much, too precise, too technical, too ambitious. Maybe I thought my family was right. Maybe I should just smile more, talk less. Let Jake and the others fumble through client meetings while I stayed in the background. That was the poison they made me doubt what the numbers screamed. And my mother's voice only deepened that cut. Honey, men don't like women who sound too smart. Let them feel important. She said it kindly as though she were giving me a gift. But what kind of gift tells you to shrink, to become smaller, so others can appear taller? It was advice dressed as love, but it left me hollow. The cycle repeated so often it became predictable. I'd spend weeks refining a model. Jake would stroll into a meeting late, armed with nothing but his phone. He'd repeat a watered-down version of my work, and everyone would nod in approval. My father would beam with pride at Jake's instincts. My uncles would mutter about fresh thinking. I would sit there silent, nails digging into my palms, my chest tight with rage. It wasn't just about the lost recognition, it was about identity. They were erasing me in real time, pretending I didn't exist, in the very place where I had given everything. And the cruelest part, I let them. For years I kept showing up, hoping maybe one day they'd surprise me with acknowledgement. But the surprise never came. Instead, I collected memories like bruises. The meeting where my father translated my explanation to a client into plain English, turning sound financial advice into something almost inaccurate. The retreat I wasn't invited to. the client dinner where my seat was shifted to the corner, while Jake sat front and center telling stories he'd stolen from me. Every bruise hardened me. Slowly, the girl who once believed effort would be rewarded began to change. I smiled less. I recorded more. I saved documents, emails, proof. Not because I was plotting revenge, at least not yet, but because I knew one day I might need to prove, even if only to myself, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining the theft of my own work. That kind of pain is heavy, but it also sharpens. It strips away illusions, burns off the hope that keeps you clinging. It teaches you something no textbook ever could. Sometimes you don't fail because you're unworthy. You fail because the people around you are terrified of what your worth exposes about them. And that realization, quiet, cold, steady, was the beginning of the end. Because once you accept they will never see you, you stop begging to be seen. You start preparing for the day when they have no choice. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I had arrived early as always, coffee in hand, ready to finalize the presentation for one of our biggest clients, the Donovans, a family whose portfolio I had nurtured personally, whose trust I had earned through years of meticulous strategies and transparent communication. That account was mine. Everyone in the firm knew it. But when I walked past the glass-walled conference room, I froze. There they were, my father, my cousin Jake, and two other partners already seated with the Donovans. The meeting had been moved up without me, and on the screen in front of them I saw my slides, my research, my strategy, my words. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Watching from the hallway, I felt my stomach twist as Jake stumbled through points he barely understood. Yet the Donovans nodded politely, reassured by the Miller name on the screen. My father leaned back proud as if Jake had masterminded the whole thing. When the client smiled, he even reached over and patted Jake on the back. That gesture cut deeper than any insult ever could. I wanted to burst through the door to expose the lie in real time, but I didn't. I stood there paralyzed, my hands trembling as I pressed them against the cool glass. It was as if the walls themselves were telling me the truth I had denied for too long. No matter what I built, they would never let me own it. That afternoon, the betrayal only deepened. An email circulated announcing a strategic retreat at my uncle's lake house that weekend. Everyone in leadership was invited. Everyone except me. My inbox was silent, my name absent. It wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. By the time evening fell, I was back at my brownstone, staring at my laptop screen, but not seeing anything. My mind replayed years of memories like an endless reel. The risk models Jake had parroted, the expansion plans Patricia had stolen, the client dinners where I'd been silenced. All the extra hours I'd given, all the weekends I had sacrificed, all the sacrifices I'd made to prove I belonged. And for what a glass wall separating me from the very legacy I had built. That night something broke inside me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't grief, it was finality. I whispered the word aloud to my empty office, enough. And it was as though the silence answered back, steady and absolute. I began reviewing everything, my patents, my independent accounts, the contracts that tied clients to me personally rather than to Miller Financial. I checked that every document was secure, every safeguard in place. It wasn't revenge I was planning. It was survival. It was liberation. And you know what? I think many of you have been there too. Maybe not in a boardroom, maybe not with millions of dollars on the line, but maybe in a classroom or an office or even at a family dinner table. Have you ever had someone steal your work, your idea, your effort, and then watch the room cheer for them while you sat in silence? If you have, leave a comment. Tell me what you did in that moment. Did you fight back? Or did you swallow it like I did until the weight became unbearable? Because here's the truth I learned: silence doesn't buy you respect. It only teaches them how far they can go. And the Millers had gone too far. That Tuesday was my breaking point. The moment I understood that I would never be given recognition, I would have to claim it. And once I made that decision, there was no turning back. The next message from my father, the one that would arrive just days later, wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. And my response would send shockwaves through the entire family. The message came late on a Friday afternoon. My father, in his usual clipped tone, had written in the family WhatsApp group, "After considerable discussion, we think it would be best if Heather steps away from client management for now. This isn't permanent, just a chance to realign with the Miller way of doing things." There it was. Not just the glass wall of exclusion anymore, but the slammed door. The final seal on years of dismissal. And what followed stung even more, a stream of quick affirmations. "Completely agree. Smart move." From Uncle Richard, happy to step in and take over her accounts. From Jake. Even my mother typed, "We only want what's best for everyone." No hesitation, no protest. No one even asked me what I thought. I stared at the glowing screen for 17 minutes each second, driving the nail deeper. Then I typed, "Understood. I'll respect that decision and step away from the family fund too, wishing everyone continued success." Simple, professional, but buried inside was a bomb they hadn't yet realized. Because my contribution wasn't just pocket change. Over the years, I had quietly built my portion of the family fund into $4,200,000. With growth, it had swelled to nearly $6 million, almost 35% of the entire pool. They had all assumed my money would sit there silently sustaining their deals. They never imagined I would take it back. I logged into the fund's banking portal, my fingers steady on the keys. A few clicks, a confirmation screen. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this transaction?" I smiled. Yes, I was sure. For the first time in my life, I was absolutely sure. I hit confirm. In an instant, the numbers shifted. My account emptied. The family fund shuttered. I followed protocol, emailing the family attorney with documentation, citing Section 7.3 of our agreement, the clause that allowed major contributors to withdraw with proper notice. I blind copied myself on a separate email for records. And just like that, I was free. The family fund had always operated with a liquidity requirement, at least 50% in easily accessible accounts. That structure meant my withdrawal wouldn't bounce, but it also meant something else: it would destabilize the entire pool. The Henderson real estate deal they were counting on. Suddenly short, their quick deployment cash frozen in chaos. Every transaction over $50,000 triggered alerts to all administrators. I knew by nightfall their phones would be buzzing, but I didn't wait around for their panic. I shut my laptop, walked into my living room, and made myself tea. Outside my window, Boston's skyline glowed against the dusk, and for once I felt it wasn't just mocking me, it was mine. There was sadness, of course. These were the people I had grown up with, eaten Thanksgiving dinners beside, laughed with at weddings. But as steam curled from my cup, another feeling pushed through stronger than the sorrow: liberation. For years I had endured their erasure because I feared losing them, but what I hadn't realized was that I'd already lost them. The group message proved it. They had chosen convenience over me, profit over me, tradition over me. So now I was choosing myself. As night fell, I slid the key documents from my HomeSafe patents, contracts, LLC records, proof of everything I had built outside the family's shadow. Each page felt like armor, each signature like a shield. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning survival. And yet a part of me couldn't deny the irony. They wanted me to step away. So I had. But not in the quiet, obedient way they had imagined. I hadn't stepped away from the table. I had pulled the table out from under them. By the time my phone began buzzing at 7:30 that night, I ignored it. I ordered takeout. I turned on a movie. I gave myself permission to enjoy a Friday evening I had earned. Because across town, my family was just beginning to realize what I had done. And they had no idea it was only the start. By sunrise, my phone looked like a crime scene. 64 missed calls, 127 text messages, 43 WhatsApp notifications, 17 voicemails, all of them stacked, blinking, screaming for my attention. I let them sit there while I made coffee, each drip into the pot, louder than the chorus of desperation buzzing in my hand. The first voicemail was sharp, full of my father's usual command. "Heather, call me immediately. The fund flagged your transfer. There must be some mistake." The second one cracked a little. "This is unacceptable. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way. Call me back now." By the third, his voice shook. By the 4th, at 2:15 in the morning, the anger had drained out, replaced by naked panic. The bank froze everything. We can't move a dime. Deals are collapsing. Please, Heather, call me back. I didn't. Because the truth was, this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a tantrum. It was clarity. They had told me to step away, and I had obeyed, just not in the way they expected. By Saturday afternoon, a friend from college, Sandra, now a senior manager at the bank, called me quietly. Your family is in chaos. Your father's been on 3 different calls. Your uncle showed up in person, demanding to speak with the president. But from what I see, Heather, everything you did was by the book. The freeze is standard protocol when someone pulls a large percentage. It'll resolve by Monday. I thanked her, sipping my coffee as she chuckled softly. They're unraveling, Heather, and you sound calm. I was calm, because for the first time I was on the outside of their panic, not crushed beneath it. But their desperation bled into every corner. Snippets of texts popped up despite my muted notifications. Uncle Richard raging, "This is sabotage." Aunt Patricia flipping sides. "Heather, you've always been brilliant. Let's talk as women in finance." Jake whining. What about the Henderson deal? We were counting on it, and my mother's guilt-soaked plea. "Honey, please talk to us. We can fix this." The Henderson deal. That was the ticking bomb. A $20 million project that required the fund's liquidity for the down payment. Without my nearly $6 million, the numbers didn't add up. And because the bank froze all accounts pending verification, they couldn't even access the remainder. 6 months of planning of backroom handshakes and projected profits dissolving in real time. And yet as their empire cracked, I felt lighter. For years I had been the invisible backbone. Now they felt my absence like a missing limb. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly people who dismiss you as insignificant panic when you finally withdraw. How suddenly they realize your weight when it's no longer propping them up. And maybe you've lived a version of this too. Have you ever stepped back just once and watched everything you carried for other people collapse in your absence? Have you ever discovered that the very thing they took for granted was the thing they couldn't survive without? If you have, share it below. I promise you're not alone. Because here's the truth: when people undervalue you, they assume you'll never walk away. They build their world on the bet that your silence will hold. And when you finally refuse, that world begins to tremble. By Sunday morning, the tone of the messages shifted again. No more rage, just desperation, pleas wrapped in guilt, emotional appeals about family loyalty, about my grandfather's legacy. But by then it was too late. They had made their choice in a group chat. And I had made mine with a single transfer. Still, even as I watched them spiral, I knew one thing for certain. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. Sunday night, my security system chimed. Someone was at the door. On the screen, I saw my father. His shirt was wrinkled. His posture slumped, his face lined with exhaustion I had never seen before. For a moment, I considered ignoring him. I had promised myself everything would wait until Monday. But something in his defeated stance made me open the door. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, eyes weary, and said, "The Henderson deal falls through tomorrow at 9 in the morning if we don't have the funds. That's $3 million lost. We need to talk." I held his gaze and replied steadily, "Then we talk. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, at my home office. Bring whoever you want." And for the first time in my life, my father nodded, not as a patriarch giving orders, but as a man with no other choice. The next morning, my dining room transformed into a boardroom. I set out documents in neat stacks, brewed coffee, even arranged a tray of pastries. It wasn't about hospitality. It was about control. Every detail was intentional, every placement a reminder this was my space, my terms. At 8:30, the cameras lit up again. My father wasn't alone. He brought Uncle Richard, Aunt Patricia, cousin Jake, and Jonathan, the family's attorney. They looked like an army marching into battle, but one glance told me they were rattled. Their empire was wobbling, and they knew it. When I opened the door, they filed in with stiff politeness eyes darting around my brownstone. Some of them had never been here before. I could see the flicker of surprise at the artwork, the high-end furnishings, the sense of independence that radiated from every corner. This wasn't the home of a woman still learning the real world. This was the home of someone who had built her own. I led them to the dining room. The table was set with papers at each seat, but I remained standing at the head. Normally that position belonged to my father, but not today. He noticed. They all noticed. Still none of them challenged it, not when they needed me. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice calm. They muttered their thanks as I poured. When I finally sat, I sat at the head deliberately, and the silence that followed was heavy. My father cleared his throat first. "Heather, we're here to resolve this quickly. The Henderson deal?" I raised my hand. The same gesture he had used to silence me in meetings for years. He stopped mid-sentence. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. "Before we discuss any specific deal," I said evenly, "we need to address the larger issue. I have withdrawn my contribution from the family fund, as is my right. The bank has confirmed the transaction is proper. The freeze will lift once verification is complete." Uncle Richard exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're holding the family hostage over hurt feelings." I turned to him with icy calm. "This isn't about feelings. This is about value. For 8 years, I generated returns above market average. My division carried 62% of profits. Clients trusted me. Yet I was removed from management via group text based on feedback that doesn't exist. That's not business, it's disrespect." Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her voice sticky sweet, "Darling. The message was just a quick way to communicate. We were going to discuss details at the retreat." "The retreat I wasn't invited to," I asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. Jake snorted. "You're blowing this out of proportion. So you got your feelings hurt. Did you really have to blow up a major deal?" I fixed my eyes on him. "I didn't blow up anything. I withdrew my own money. The fact that the fund can't function without it, that's the real problem. You've been taking me for granted. Financially, professionally, personally." My father leaned forward, desperation seeping through his composure. "Whatever mistakes were made, this response is disproportionate. You've put millions at risk." "No," I replied. "You did, by excluding the one person who was actually holding everything together. For years they had dismissed me as too technical, too ambitious, too much. And now, sitting at the head of my own table, I realized I wasn't too much. I was exactly enough, and they were terrified of it. And maybe you've seen this play out in your own life. Have you ever been in a room where your seat was deliberately pushed aside, only to realize that the table couldn't stand without you? Share that moment in the comments. Tell me how you handled it, because sometimes taking your rightful place isn't about being invited. It's about claiming it. That morning, the Millers came to my home expecting a plea. Instead, they found a woman who no longer begged. And though the Henderson deal was urgent, I knew we were only beginning to untangle something far deeper, the truth about who actually held the power. The room was heavy with tension, every eye fixed on me. For years, I had been the one glancing nervously at my father's gestures, my uncle's interruptions, Jake's smug grin. But here, in my dining room on my terms, the roles had shifted. They were waiting for me. I let the silence stretch before speaking. "The Henderson deal is important. I understand that. And I have the power to save it. But let's be clear. I am not reinvesting blindly into a system that decided I was disposable. If you want my contribution, it will not be as a silent partner. It will be as a lender." They blinked, processing. Uncle Richard's face turned red, a vein bulging at his temple. "A lender," he spat. "You're going to charge your own family interest." I didn't flinch. "Correct. $5 million, structured as a loan from my personal holdings to the family fund, at market interest rates, with clear repayment terms. Jonathan can draft the paperwork immediately." My father's jaw tightened. "Heather, we are family. We don't need contracts to do what's right." I leaned forward. Family. The same family that removed me by group text. The same family that excluded me from the retreat. The same family that spent years dismissing my work while applauding incompetence, no father. You don't get to hide behind the word family when it suits you. This is business, and business requires terms. Jonathan, the attorney, cleared his throat cautiously. "She's correct. Under these circumstances, offering financing at market rate is actually favorable. Any outside lender would demand harsher terms, especially under a time crunch. The relief that had flickered across their faces when I mentioned saving the deal now dimmed into anger, shame, and disbelief. Aunt Patricia tried her old tactic, softening her tone. "Sweetheart, we all say things in the heat of the moment. The message wasn't meant to hurt you. Can't we just reset and move forward?" I shook my head slowly. This isn't about one message. It's about a pattern. Years of being erased, undermined, dismissed. You don't get to reset that with an apology when millions are on the line. Respect isn't something you suddenly decide to hand out because you're desperate. Respect is earned. And for 8 years, I've been the one earning it while you cashed the checks. Jake couldn't help himself. He leaned back, smirking. "You act like you're the only one working here. Newsflash, Heather, you need us as much as we need you. Where exactly do you think you'd be without the Miller name?" I met his gaze without blinking. That's a question I'll answer soon enough. But right now, this conversation is about Henderson. You need $5 million by 9 o'clock tomorrow. I am prepared to wire the money, under my terms. My father's eyes darted between the others. I could see the calculation written across his face, pride against necessity, control against collapse. Finally, he exhaled through his nose a sharp sound of defeat. "Fine. Jonathan, draft the agreement." Uncle Richard slammed his fist on the table. "This is extortion." "No," I said evenly. "This is negotiation. Something you've all forgotten how to do because you assumed I'd never walk away." Silence followed, thick and bitter. For the first time, I wasn't the one silenced. I was the one holding the room in place, and I realized something profound. It wasn't just about the money. It was about shifting the ground beneath them. For years, they thought I needed them to survive. But now they saw the truth: they couldn't survive without me. The papers were drawn up quickly. $5 million wired under loan terms I dictated. The Henderson deal would be saved. Their empire wouldn't crumble, not today. But they all knew the balance of power had tilted, permanently. And though I hadn't revealed it yet, there was something else they didn't know. A truth even more destabilizing than the money. That revelation would come soon, and when it did, it would shake them to their core. The agreement was signed. Jonathan's pen scratched across the pages the transfer initiated, and I could almost feel the tension in the room loosen slightly. They had the money. The Henderson deal could go forward. For the first time in 48 hours, they thought maybe the storm had passed. But they didn't understand. The money was only the surface. The real shift was still coming. I walked to the sideboard and picked up a small black remote. Their eyes followed me, curious, uncertain. With one click, the large television mounted on my dining room wall flickered to life. On the screen appeared a simple logo, Heather Miller Capital Management. For a moment, silence. Then Uncle Richard barked a laugh that didn't quite hide the tremor in his voice. "This is a joke, right?" I advanced the slide. Growth charts filled the screen, clean lines climbing steadily upward. "Not a joke," I said. "For the past 4 years, I've been operating my own firm, separate from Miller Financial, independent. Every client, every decision, every result mine." Jake scoffed, trying to mask his unease. "That's impossible. You've been working full-time for us. When would you have time to run another business?" I met his gaze. Evenings, weekends, the vacation days I never took. While you all drank champagne at the lake house, I was building something real. The next slide appeared average returns of 17%. Nearly double what Miller Financial was celebrating. A hush fell. Aunt Patricia's lips parted, her eyes darting nervously. Then came the patents, 7 of them. Algorithms, trading systems, risk models, all registered in my name, not the firm's. I slid a folder toward Jonathan. Documented, time-stamped, developed with my own resources on my own time. Jonathan scanned quickly, then looked up. "She's correct. Legally, these belong to her." My father's voice was low, heavy. "You've been competing with us." "No," I said firmly. "I've been protecting myself. Because I knew one day this family would push me too far. And I refused to be left with nothing after giving you everything." Another slide. A client list appeared, 27 high-net-worth individuals whose combined assets under management totaled over $400 million. Not one of them currently tied to Miller Financial. Jake muttered, "That can't be real," but his voice faltered. And here I continued, handing another set of documents to Jonathan, our contracts with 17 current Miller Financial clients. Each agreement contains personal service clauses, meaning if I leave, they have the right to transfer their accounts to follow me. Jonathan's brow furrowed as he read, then slowly nodded. These are valid. If Heather walks, the clients can walk with her. We're talking approximately $230 million in assets. The silence in the room was deafening. My father's shoulders sagged, his eyes fixed on the table. Uncle Richard's face had gone crimson, his mouth working without sound. Patricia pressed her lips together, searching for her usual sugary words, but finding none. Jake, though, was the first to break. This is dramatic. Where do you think you'd go without us, without the Miller name? I smiled. That's the wrong question, Jake. The real question is, where do you think you'll be without me? The weight of that truth sank in. I could feel it. For years they had dismissed me as too ambitious, too technical, too much. Now they realized I was more than they ever dared imagine. I wasn't just a daughter begging for respect. I was a competitor, a force, someone who could take their empire apart piece by piece if I chose. And I wasn't done, not yet. Because what I had revealed was only the beginning. And this is where I'll pause for you. If you were in my shoes, sitting at that table, watching the faces of the people who spent years dismissing you, would you have revealed your cards? Or would you have kept them hidden until the last possible moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious, because sometimes the timing of truth is more powerful than the truth itself. The Millers thought they had seen the full extent of what I could do. They were wrong. The real negotiation hadn't even started. The room was suffocatingly quiet after my presentation. My slides still glowed on the wall, cold numbers spelling out a truth my family had spent years refusing to see. For once, there was no dismissive chuckle, no quick interruption to silence me. Only silence itself, thick, heavy, undeniable. Jake looked as if he wanted to laugh, but the sound died in his throat. Aunt Patricia shifted in her chair, trying to compose her face into something resembling warmth, though her eyes betrayed calculation. Uncle Richard's jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. But my father looked different. His eyes weren't angry, they weren't defensive, they were tired. And behind the exhaustion, for the first time, I saw it respect. He leaned forward slowly, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I underestimated you. The words seemed foreign on his tongue, as if they burned coming out. He looked at me fully. I've been underestimating you your entire life, haven't I? For a moment I couldn't speak. I had dreamed of this acknowledgement, imagined it in so many ways, loud, dramatic, defiant. But the reality was softer, heavier. I met his gaze and answered simply, yes. The others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to break the spell. My father exhaled, his shoulders sagging, as if he were finally carrying the weight of his mistakes. I thought protecting the family legacy meant keeping things the same. I thought experience meant more than innovation. But it was you. All along, it was you driving the growth, keeping us alive. And I refused to see it. Hearing him admit it should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like mourning. Mourning the years wasted, the bond fractured, the nights I'd gone home doubting myself when the truth had been so clear. Patricia jumped in quickly, eager to reshape the narrative. Heather, darling, I always said you were the most talented one in the family. We didn't know how to give you the right platform. I cut her off with a calmness that surprised even me. No, Patricia. You knew. You all knew. You just chose to look away. Because giving me credit meant giving me power, and none of you were willing to do that. Richard grumbled, You're exaggerating. But even his voice lacked conviction. He knew the evidence on the screen spoke louder than any denial. I looked at each of them in turn, my voice steady. I have brought millions in profit to this family. I have patents that belong to me alone, clients who will follow me if I leave. For years I was treated as an afterthought. That ends today. You don't have to like it, but you will respect it. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was acknowledgement. Even if they hated me for it, they couldn't erase me anymore. And then my father did something I never expected. He nodded. A small gesture, but waited. For what it's worth, he said, his voice rough, I am proud of you. It hit harder than I thought it would. I wanted to tell him it was too late, that his pride now couldn't erase the years he withheld it. But some part of me, the part still craving his approval, soaked in the words like sunlight after a storm. I let the silence sit for a beat longer before leaning back in my chair. This is only the beginning. What happens next depends on whether you're finally willing to treat me as an equal, or whether I walk away and take with me what's already mine. Their faces told me everything. They weren't ready to lose me. For the first time they were afraid, not of markets, not of competitors, of me. And maybe you know this feeling too. If you've ever spent years trying to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you and then finally force them to acknowledge your worth, share that moment here. Tell me how it felt. And if you want more stories of standing your ground and reclaiming your voice, subscribe. This space is for us, the ones who refuse to stay silent any longer. Because that day in my dining room, the balance of power shifted. The Millers had built their empire on legacy, but now they understood legacy means nothing without the people who keep it alive. And I was done being invisible. The next family meeting did not take place in their oak-paneled conference room with my father presiding at the head of the table and me quietly flipping through slides no one read. It took place in a private room at a Boston restaurant neutral ground, chosen deliberately. I arrived early, insisting on a round table rather than a long one. No head, no hierarchy. When they filed in my father, my uncles Patricia, Jake, even my mother, the shift was immediate. They understood they were not stepping into their territory. They were stepping into mine. My father began in a voice softer than usual. Heather, over the past month we've had time to reflect. We recognize now that we failed to value you properly. We want to propose a new arrangement. Folders were passed around. I opened mine, scanning quickly. The words leapt out: Miller Capital Management. President and CEO Heather Miller. They were offering me my own division, not symbolic, not ceremonial, but real. Autonomous investment strategies, independent client relationships, profit sharing tied directly to my results. A restructuring of the family fund itself, no longer one vote per person, but proportional to actual contribution. For the first time, power would not be handed out like candy at Christmas. It would be earned. Uncle Richard's voice was gruff but steady. We've resisted change for too long. Your results speak for themselves. It's time the business evolved. Even Patricia, master of manipulation, chose her words carefully. Families must adapt, darling. We can't cling to the past. You've shown us that. Jake, though visibly uncomfortable, muttered, I've been reviewing your strategies. There's more depth than I gave you credit for. The admission cost him dearly. I saw it in his clenched jaw. And then there was my father. He looked directly at me, no bravado, no mask. We need you, and we want to do this right. For years I had imagined this moment, but I never expected it to arrive like this, with concessions, with structure, with real change written into contracts. My conditions were clear. My patents would remain legally mine. My independent firm would merge, but with protections in place. My clients would follow me on my terms. Succession would no longer be dictated by seniority or gender, but by measurable results. Jonathan, the attorney, confirmed it all. These terms recognize Heather's contributions while protecting the family's legacy. It is a fair compromise. I closed the folder and let silence hang for a moment. Understand this, I said. I am not agreeing because I need your approval. I am agreeing because this structure finally respects what I have built. If that respect is withdrawn again, I will walk. And this time, I will not come back. No one argued. They couldn't. They had seen what I could do on my own. They knew the clients, the patents, the capital, all of it would follow me. So the agreement was signed. Miller Capital Management was born. My division, my leadership. My name attached not as an afterthought, but as a force. The months that followed were not perfect. Old habits surfaced. My father occasionally tried to override my decisions, only to be reminded that his vote no longer carried unchecked weight. Jake attempted to slip into meetings with my clients, but the contracts left no room for interference. Patricia's subtle undermining remarks continued, but now they rang hollow, powerless against the structure I had insisted on. And yet beneath the friction, something new was taking root. Clients flocked to my division, drawn by innovation instead of tradition. Returns surged, new accounts opened. For the first time in decades, Miller Financial wasn't clinging to its legacy, it was expanding into the future. And it was doing so under my name. What struck me most, though, wasn't the success. It was the quiet respect that began to replace old patterns. My father, who once silenced me with a tap of his pen, now paused to listen. My uncles, who dismissed me as too technical, now asked questions. Even Jake, resentful as he was stopped smirking quite so much. I hadn't just secured a title, I had rewritten the rules. And as I sat in my office one evening, reviewing reports with my team, I realized something powerful. Respect once claimed could not be taken away. They could resist it, they could resent it, but they could never erase it again. The Millers had built their empire on legacy. I was building its future on merit. And for the first time, I knew the difference. A year later, I found myself in a quiet office with my father. The building was nearly empty, the sun long gone, leaving only the glow of desk lamps and city lights. We were reviewing quarterly results together, numbers that once again my division had led. For the first time in my life, there was no debate about it, no stolen credit. The report spoke clearly. Miller Capital Management was outperforming every other branch of the firm. My father set the papers down and leaned back in his chair, eyes far away. "I've been thinking about your grandfather," he said softly. "When he handed me the business, he told me something I never understood until now. He said, 'The best legacy isn't preservation, it's evolution.' I thought he meant protecting what he built, but now watching you, I think he meant letting it change, letting it grow even if it doesn't look the same." I studied him, hearing something rare in his voice: humility, regret, pride too. "Evolution is harder than preservation," I said. "Preservation means holding on. Evolution means admitting the old way isn't enough anymore." He gave a small, tired smile, and pride makes admitting that almost impossible. I thought about the years of silence, the dismissals, the condescension, about how many times I had left his office with my voice caught in my throat. Yet here he was, finally seeing me, finally speaking the words I had waited my whole life to hear. "It's never too late to evolve," I replied. The truth is, my victory wasn't about a division or a loan or even the money. It was about something far deeper. I had stopped waiting for recognition and started demanding it. I had stopped begging for a seat at their table and built my own instead. And when they finally came knocking desperate for help, I didn't just join them, I set the terms. Respect isn't something you wait for, it's something you claim. And maybe that's the part of the story that matters most to you listening now. Because maybe you've been dismissed too. Maybe your family, your boss, your peers, someone you trusted has treated you as less than what you are. Maybe you've been erased, silenced, overlooked, all while quietly carrying the weight that kept everything running. If that's you, then hear this. Your worth doesn't depend on their recognition. It lives in your results, your resilience, your refusal to stay small. And the day you stop waiting for permission to be seen is the day everything begins to change. The Millers didn't just learn a financial lesson, they learned a human one, and so did I. I no longer see myself as the daughter they once dismissed. I am the woman who forced an empire to evolve, and that lesson is one I'll never forget. So now I'll leave you with a question. What would you do to make people finally see your worth? Would you walk away? Would you build your own table? Or would you, like me, wait until the moment came to turn everything they took for granted into undeniable power? Share your answer in the comments. And if this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt the sting of being undervalued, don't let it stop here. Subscribe, join our community, and stay with me for the next story. Because the fight for recognition doesn't end with one victory, and sometimes the lessons we learn in one battle prepare us for the next. I closed the last folder that night feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. The journey had been long, painful, and costly. But in the end, I hadn't just saved myself. I had reshaped the very legacy they once tried to deny me. And as I turned off the lights, I whispered the words I wished someone had told me long ago. Your worth was never theirs to give. It was always yours to claim. Avrati, when I look back now, I don't just see the battles. I see the growth. The countless nights of doubt, the endless meetings where my voice was silenced, those weren't wasted. They shaped me. They sharpened me. And they taught me that silence is not peace. It's surrender. Taking back my contribution, exposing what I had built, forcing my family to face the truth. Those were acts of courage I didn't know I had. And yet they didn't make me ruthless. They made me free. Freedom is not the absence of struggle. It's the power to choose. To choose where to invest your energy, who deserves your loyalty, and when to finally walk away. My family thought they could define my value. They were wrong. The day I claimed it for myself was the day everything changed. I see Amanda, my cousin, finding her own path in architecture. I see my father humbler, now realizing that legacy isn't about clinging to the past, but allowing the next generation to lead. I see myself not as the overlooked daughter, but as a woman who turned pain into power and neglect into transformation. And maybe that's what I want you to take from my story. That respect isn't a gift wrapped in someone else's approval. It's a truth you carry, waiting for the moment you finally stand and declare it. So if you've been overlooked, if you've been silenced, remember this. Your worth was never theirs to decide. It was always yours. Claim it, live it, protect it. Because the most powerful legacy you can leave isn't wealth or reputation. It's the unshakable knowledge of your own value. It's